Bojo, YMYWCA Anishinaabekwe, Gingo Dodem, St. Peter's Nindinjaba, Winnipeg Ninda, Anishinaabekwe and Dao. I'd like to welcome us here, meeting this morning on Treaty 1 territory and the homeland of the Métis Nation. So why do I start my talk to you like that this morning? I introduce myself to you as a friend, as a relative. It's part of how we start our relationship this morning, or maybe continue our relationship. This is the idea that you have to know where I come from in order for us to be connected. What this doesn't tell you is that I travel for a living. I've traveled all over the world. I've been able to talk about what a beautiful place it is that we live. And trust me, it's not that difficult. Where we live here is so beautiful. However, working in the travel industry, I have always struggled with one thing. The travel industry sees itself as the epitome of shared cultures, of shared understanding, of bringing people together. However, the reality is that travel has not always been kind to my people. The first travelers to this land came for dinner and stayed for 400 years of oppression. However, Indigenous people have been welcoming visitors to this land for hundreds of years, and those visitors have come for many different reasons. Some would stay, many would leave. However, a community not far from here once explained the tourists to me as those who came, take what they could, and leave. That's not a shared culture and understanding. I think about how my ancestors traveled for days, for ceremony, for resources, for different reasons. And I wonder what they think when they see me working in this industry these days. I wonder what this land would look like if those explorers hadn't arrived here in 1492, if there were no colonization, there were no residential schools. Our worlds would have continued to overlap and interact with each other. Would I travel differently? And how would we be inviting each other to come and visit each other? What would the tourism website for this place look like? As an Indigenous woman working in tourism, conversations change when I'm in the room. No one ever asked me for a scenic drive down Colonization Road. When travel writers ask me what I'm doing to celebrate Canada 150, I don't even have the chance to respond before they say, oh, sorry, never mind. Canada, there's this huge space in between us. So as we learn new things about each other and where it is that this country comes from, we're learning a different way that we can connect with each other. So why did we recognize traditional territory when we travel, or when we're starting out meetings like we are today? Does that change our relationship with the land that we're on? Does that change the relationship that we have with each other? Potentially, it can cause us to challenge the idea and think of travel as an opportunity to change us. So I think of the places that I've traveled in my years, and a few years ago, I was lucky enough to visit the country of Jordan with a dear friend of mine. As we were in Jordan, we spent time out in the desert for a few days, which was one of the most magnificent experiences I've ever had. We were able to see the stars while we were in the desert, and we had a guide, a young man, a Bedouin man, that was spending time with us. So he would talk about where it was that he came from, where it was that he was planning to spend his life, and how he saw his future. He talked about how he learned to navigate by the stars, which of course isn't specific to any one culture around the world. He told stories of the constellations in the sky and talked about the bear in the north. Of course, we know that bear as Ursa Major. However, he told me one other story that really stuck with me. He talked about the fact that his father would talk about a people in a far, far away land, somewhere on the other side of the world, and those people were purposely placed on this earth, descended from the stars. Now, if you've ever heard the stories from Wilfred Buck, a teacher here in Winnipeg, he talks about how the Cree people were descended from the stars, placed specifically on this earth for a purpose. So, needless to say, my friend the guide was quite impressed to know that I had spent time with people who were descended from the stars. So, why was this so significant? It's one of the most memorable experiences I ever had. It's this idea that no matter we came from such different backgrounds, we were going to such different futures. But in that moment, the world was so small and we were connected. In order for that to have happened, we both needed to know where we came from. So what does that mean for us here in Canada? What does that mean for our relationships? And what does that mean for me working in the travel industry? As someone who's traveled the world and shared who I am with other people, there's a lot of questions I get about Indigenous people. The first is that internationally, there's this idea of the uncontacted tribe, this desire that people have to be the first to find that tribe and bring them to society. That confirms the idea that Indigenous people have to be suspended in history or frozen in time in order to be seen as authentic. The second idea is that Indigenous people are somehow magical or mysterious, and trust me, I'm the first to admit that my auntie's fry bread is really quite magical. However, the idea that human beings are magical or mysterious is quite dangerous and dehumanizing. In university, they taught me that good marketing is giving the customer what they want. However, in university, they never taught me what to do when what the customer wants is so dangerous to myself. So we have solutions, and there's ways that we can travel and be together on this land better. The first is that we have to recognize the first people of this land, the Indigenous people, and that it's part of our story together as Canadians that we're building. One example of this is an archaeologist in British Columbia. Her name is Joanne Hammond. She finds heritage signs throughout British Columbia, rewrites them, and posts them on her blog. So these signs, so if you were in charge, which sign would you put up? Which sign is correct? Think about how we welcome visitors to our city. If you were in charge, what would you like those signs to say? Does this change our relationship with each other? Does this change the relationship we have with the land? The second is, because we're writing this story together, we have to tell the whole story. This has to include Indigenous people, and the idea that potentially some of the place names that we have may be not what we think they are. This means you can educate yourself about the Indigenous people where you live. Were they removed from that location? Do they still live there? What about the place names of the cities, the provinces, the country where you live or where you visit? Here's a map, potentially that you recognize. Most of us should all recognize this place, but it looks a little bit different from this perspective because it's a map oriented to the east. These are the Great Lakes, with all the original place names as recognized by the Anishinaabe people. The Anishinaabe people recognize that life comes from the east. The sun rises in the east. We start each of our days by looking to the east. Does it make you wonder why we've always looked at maps oriented to the north? So I want to give you these ideas to challenge your thought that potentially travel can be something based in exploration, that we have this fabricated desire to be the first to experience the newest and coolest, to plant your stake in the land and claim it as your own. Recently, the growth of an Indigenous tourism industry, there's chefs, tour guides, hotels, and lodges. They're telling the story of Indigenous people that's more than just frozen in time from 100 years ago. So my challenge to you is, how will you travel? Are you a visitor, needing to be the one that will take and leave? Or are you a guest, bringing yourself and your gifts to the places that you visit as well as the places you live? The world gets smaller as we continue to introduce each other and connect. Miigwech.